Good evening all and welcome. Sorry this video didn't come out yesterday. I actually just had dental surgery, so my mouth wasn't fully operational. Sorry about that. But there we go. Tonight we have some creeper stories for your listening pleasure. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My wife and I used to work at a relatively small office together when we were fresh out of college. We were friends with several of our co-workers, but they were more like work friends, not really people you would hang out with outside of work. That is until we began speaking with George, who was cousins with the owner of the company. He was in his mid-40s, pretty dorky and heavy-set, and made the corniest jokes. We both found him sort of endearing. One day he tells us he used to be an extra in several movies back in the 90s, and that one of those movies was streaming on Netflix. I actually thought this was really interesting, and I don't remember exactly how the rest of the conversation went, but my wife and I ended up extending an invitation for him to come over for dinner and have a screening of the movie he was in. Several weeks later, I think it was a Friday, he arrives around dinner time with a few pints of ice cream. We were excited to have him over, as my wife and I like to entertain guests, but don't have many opportunities to do so. Within only a few minutes of arriving, he asks where the bathroom is. We lived in a small apartment at the time, so I was able to just point to the bathroom door from where I was sitting, and told him to feel free to use it whenever he needed to do so. He said, "No, that's okay, I can hold it in." I remember feeling bad because the last thing I wanted was for a guest of ours to feel uncomfortable, especially so early into the evening. I shrugged it off and we had dinner, put the dishes in the sink and poured a few more glasses of wine. As we were queuing up the movie, George asked if either of us had to use the bathroom. That's weird, I was thinking. Why would he ask if we needed to use it? I thought maybe he felt weird, if he was the only one who had to go. But in my mind it didn't make sense. We said no, and carried on with the movie. Turns out the film was very low budget, and I think we ended up just fast forwarding to the part he was in, putting something else on, and continuing to pour the wine. After a while longer, he finally gets up and goes into the bathroom. While he's in there, my wife and I begin cleaning up, doing the dishes, and start doing the wind down for the night. Several minutes passed with George still in the bathroom, so I whispered to my wife, "I wonder what's taking him so long. Surely he's not doing anything more than a quick piss, right?" After about 5 minutes, George eventually comes out of the bathroom and sits down on the couch as we continue to clean up. At this point in the night, both my wife and I actually do need to use the bathroom, probably from all the wine we've been drinking. On a side note, my wife is a very attractive woman, about 5'10", slender blonde, who looks like she stepped out of a Victoria's Secret magazine. And she tends to get a lot of attention from guys whenever we go out, and always has her guard up, especially when she's around strangers. As a result, she's developed a pretty keen sense when something doesn't seem right, or when someone turns on their creep factor. My wife heads into the bathroom, does her thing, and comes back to the kitchen. We walk past each other as I head to the bathroom. As I'm going in, I hear my wife tell George that he left his watch in the bathroom. George goes, "Oh, I must have forgotten it when I took it off to wash my hands." I look in the bathroom and see the watch still sitting on the top of the toilet tank. I hand it to George, and this was strange in itself for two reasons. Who takes their watch off when they're washing their hands? And two, our bathroom had plenty of counter space. Why would he need to put it on top of the toilet tank? I tried not to think anything of it, probably because I was so tipsy from the wine. 5 minutes later, George says he's going to call it a night, so we say goodnight and he heads home. As my wife and I are getting ready for bed, we discuss how nice it was to have George over, and that we need to have guests over more often. She then turns to me and says, "I feel bad saying this, but I had a really creepy thought about George." I asked her what it was. "Well, when I walked into the bathroom and saw his watch, I had this creepy feeling about it. I noticed the face of the watch facing forwards, so my gut told me to flip the watch facing up towards the ceiling before using the toilet. We both laughed at the idea as it seemed so outrageous, but as we began to think about how the night played out, all the weird questions about if we needed to use the bathroom, and the placement of the watch, we started to really think maybe it wasn't such a crazy idea after all. We sat there for a good 5 to 10 minutes trying to come up with logical explanations for everything that happened. Suddenly, a thought popped into my head, and I remembered my father several Christmases before gave me a spy watch as a present. I have no idea why he gave it to me. I never asked for it and never really used it, but I was pretty sure I still had it somewhere deep in my closet. I immediately went digging for it, found it, opened the box, and almost fell over backwards when I saw it. It was the exact same watch that George had. At that point, we knew it wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence, nor our imaginations running wild. We could not believe it, and were so creeped out, feeling like we'd been violated in our own home. We talked about how we wanted to address this unsettling situation, but ultimately decided to keep it to ourselves and ignore him going forward, as we would not risk losing our jobs for accusations with no evidence. After all, his cousin was the owner of the company. About a week goes by and I see George at work only once. He stepped by my cube to thank me again for having him over for dinner. Trying not to punch him square in the mouth, I avoided eye contact and said, "Sure," in a tone that said, "I know what you tried to do to my wife, you perverted son of a gun." About exactly a week after the incident, my wife and I were out to dinner with my parents, and we told them what happened. My mum asked if we had Googled his name to see if maybe he had any arrest records. I had no idea why this didn't come into our minds sooner, but right then and there we Googled his name. Wouldn't you know, one of the first links that pops up was an arrest records page. I clicked into it and saw his mugshot, only it wasn't the dorky-looking guy we were used to seeing around the office. In the photo, he had greasy, disheveled hair, and the look on his face that he was wearing could kill. There was only one felony on his record, Peeping Tom. This made the experience all the more surreal and frightening. The fact that we had a felon in our apartment with a history of creeping on women made us question our judgment in people, and ultimately created a level of distrust of anyone outside our immediate family and best friends. In the end, we continued to ignore George at the office until a few months later when my wife and I were both able to find new companies to work for. Eventually, we did report him to the police and called the elementary school across the office, just to make them aware of his record. In the end, I'm just thankful that my wife trusted her gut instinct enough to flip the watch facing upwards. There really are some perverted people out there, so please always listen to your gut whenever something doesn't feel right. And George, if you're out there, listening to this, hope we never meet again. This happened a few days ago, and it was a very good lesson for me to always take some sort of protection, even if you're only going out for a small amount of time. I normally take this loud alarm with me when I go for walks or out and about by myself, but typically, it's at night time when I do this, as I'm quite a night owl. However, this day, it was still light out, and I was only going up the street to deposit some money in the bank, and I figured I'd be fine without an alarm. Due to living in a somewhat high-crime area, I typically message my mum or a close pal about where I'm going to, and when to expect a message back from me upon my return, just to be on the safe side. I also now give them a description of what I'll be wearing just to be extra careful. However, this day I was really tired, and just frankly wanted to go to the bank and get home. So I quickly texted my mum and took off. Behind the apartment complex where I live is a short road that leads to my bank. This is the shortcut way. The sidewalk leading to it is next to a few other buildings on either side, but each building is just the back entrance with no windows. In other words, It's not exactly the safest route, because if anyone wanted to try and jump you, no one would really be able to see anything unless they were a pedestrian or driving by. Nonetheless, I took the route anyway. As I was walking, the road stretches to the main street, and if you keep walking/driving on it, it also leads to the back parking lot of the bank. As I was walking, I saw a white car driving down and making a turn into the parking lot. The driver kept staring at me, and had slowed down significantly as he was staring and driving to the bank. I didn't think much of it at first. I had taken no effort in my appearance, no makeup, having messy hair, and shabby house clothes, so I couldn't imagine anyone would find me attractive that day. But I guess I was wrong. I made my way up to the ATM lobby. The bank itself was closed, but had the little vestibule open where there were 2 ATMs. As I approached the door, I noticed the man's car was parked in front of it and still running, so I figured it was cool. He must be in a hurry if he left his car running. I don't like being the only person in an ATM vestibule with strangers, so I took my sweet time walking to the entrance, hoping he would be finished before I got to the lobby. When I entered, the man was staring at me again, and I noticed from the corner of my eye that he was still looking at me while I was doing my thing. However, to my relief, he left shortly after I got in, because the ATM kept rejecting one of my bills due to it being wrinkly, and I honestly just wanted to make sure that he wasn't there when I left, so made an effort in being slow. After finally getting the machine to accept my bills, I took my card and proceeded to leave. The door of the lobby is tinted glass, so you can clearly see what's outside. As I headed to the door, my stomach dropped. There was the man still in his car, hand on the steering wheel, staring directly into the door of the lobby. I muttered to myself, no one else was there, and no one else was around, so it's not like he was waiting for someone else to exit but me. Why would he be sitting in his car for well over 5 minutes, just staring at the door, knowing I was the only one in there? As you can imagine, it made me feel sick on the inside. I was feeling very uncomfortable and just wanted to go home. I did my best to ignore him, refraining from making eye contact, and walked out the door. On the side of the building are concrete stairs that lead to a somewhat closed-off parking area for employees to park. I took the stairs, hoping he would lose sight of me and just piss off at this point. I had planned on taking the same route home, as I did walking there, but I was walking down the stairs when something in me told me to stop. I felt very wrong about going home the way I came. I pulled out my phone and began texting my mum about what was going on, and gave her a full description of the man. At this point, I was standing at the last stair when I heard and saw his car ever so slowly drive inward towards me in the parking lot. I'm scared now, completely alone, and my mum is almost a half-hour drive away, and I don't know what this dude was planning. I raised my phone up to kind of make it look like I was going to take a picture, although I didn't and wish I had. But I wanted to make it clear that I had my phone with me to hopefully scare him off a bit. That apparently worked, because he began to drive back to the street. But this time, he took the street I came up on, while staring at me and looking behind his seat the entire time as he drove very slowly out of the bank's parking lot. This really got to me, especially the fact he took the road I came up, because to take that road to get to the main street again, you have to go all the way around 2 other huge buildings, so it's very tedious to go in that direction versus going forwards from the ATM parking lot, where it takes you directly to the main street. I also messaged a close friend of mine explaining the situation as well, and giving her my mum's number just in case anything else happened. I didn't leave the parking lot for a while, staying close in camera view before proceeding out the front entrance, and walking around for an hour into a different neighborhood just to make sure I was no longer being followed. I don't know what the heck this man had intended, or why he was so infatuated with me, but it really bothered me. I will always take my loud alarm that's literally louder than a fire alarm whenever I go outside. The next morning I went to the bank and explained the situation to one of the employees, who took it very seriously and even stressed that I should have called the police and stayed in the lobby. I feel stupid for not calling the police, but I didn't think they'd be able to do much about it, as no crime had actually been committed. Yet. I'm grateful that nothing happened, but it really taught me a lesson. Even if you look like a potato, it doesn't mean someone won't try and do something to you. Ladies and guys, always take some safety precautions before leaving, and if you live alone, let someone know where you're going, what you're wearing, and when to expect a reply from them. Better safe than in the trunk of some guy's car. This happened a good 7 years ago. I wasn't the best person back then, and was heavy into drugs, and was one of the biggest dope cooker's proteges. That's what he called me. The thing between us went on for a good 6 months. He would lock me in a garage and tell me to work. He became abusive and began getting high on his own supply, and things got crazy from there. One day he hurt me badly, and when he wasn't around I took off, took the supplies, our supplies and my stuff, and that was that. I stayed low for about a month, was living with some friends, and got a Facebook message from some guy I knew, and he said he had some things I would need, since he really needed money, and he was someone I thought I could trust. So myself and my female friend drove over to his house. When we pull up, I see there are about 6 or more guys, which for this area is normal. I get out and walk up to them to get the stuff, and they all surround me. They say that Ron, the guy from earlier, was on his way and I'm not going anywhere. I almost blacked out at that point, when Ron comes flying up in a truck with a van behind him, and he jumps out, grabs me by the hair and throws me in the van, and has someone drive his truck and follow us, and my poor girlfriend was so scared I yelled at her to leave. I was terrified. Ron was a dangerous person, and had already done prison time for murder. For 3 days he held me hostage, and said he would kill me before he let me leave. And at all times I had tons of eyes watching me. He even followed me when I went to the bathroom. I didn't think I'd ever get away. I decided I could either kill him or play it off like I wanted to be with him, and decided to play it cool. The 3rd day it was late afternoon, and he took me out into the boonies. He had to work on someone's vehicle, and I stayed in the person's house while he was outside. I was finally alone. I checked every room to find a window I could leave out, but saw a side door with a dog tied up outside near the porch. So I went outside and acted like I was petting the dog, and when he wasn't looking I started walking behind the house and ran. I went into the woods, and halfway through, I saw and heard his loud truck speeding down the road, and I ran faster until I reached a little neighborhood and ran up the first house and knocked on the big glass door. This young girl in her teens answered the door, and I was hysterical, and she told me to come in, and her dad came out and saw me and asked me how they could help. I asked them to please take me to my friend's house and explain what happened. He asked if I needed them to call the cops, but at the time I had a warrant, so I just said no, I wanted to go home. I went into the garage, got in their car and sat on the floorboards until we reached the interstate, and just started bawling and thanking them, telling them how they saved my life. I am still so thankful for the family that saved me. I knew I looked a mess, hadn't showered in 3 days, and they still helped me. I got to my friends and thanked him one last time and ran up to the door and knocked. When my friend answered the door, she looked like she saw a ghost and gave me the biggest hug and started to cry. She thought I had been killed. After that, I made sure to be more careful, and about a year later finally got clean and left the state for good. Ron went to prison for other reasons, and I'm not sure when he'll be released, but hopefully never. There are good people out there, but there are some scary ones. Be careful who you trust, people. Remember, even though you may feel invincible, you're not. No one is. Sometimes just talking about it makes my heart race when I think about how I escaped. It still feels like a dream. I met this kid at my hockey practice in March. The hockey team was made up of a range of kids from ages 11 to 13. This kid had recently changed teams to this one for various reasons and seemed pretty nice. We all got along pretty well, and one day after a game he introduced our parents to each other, and we all went to a diner for lunch after that. His family seemed nice and he seemed like an average kid. I invited him over, and we bought a bike and scooter to the park and played hide and seek in the playground. One day I invited him over to my house to hang out, and after playing some video games for a while we took our scooters to the park. I keep repeating how average this kid seemed because what happened the next day still confuses me. We had just won our first hockey game in a tournament and wouldn't play our next game until the next day. I invited him to lunch with my mum and her friend, who had decided to come along and watch the game. And after eating, my mum drove us to my house. He lived in a pretty bad part of town, so I had always declined his mum's invitation to come over. We planned to go outside and play tennis on some nearby backboards, but first we would play some video games. During one of our games, his mum called and said he had to leave soon so that he wouldn't be late for his next activity. He told me he was going to take my trophy with him. For background, this previous season I had played his old team and beat them in the finals of the tournament funded by them, so he probably had a bit of resentment for that, especially since my trophy was bigger than his. Anyway, he disappeared with the trophy, and since my apartment is very small, I thought he was right outside in the corridor trying to prank me. But I looked in our front hall and saw his shoes still out there. I called out for him next to the door, "You left your shoes," and I got no reply from outside, but I heard a slight shuffling from inside a walk-in closet next to our front hall that was used for my mum's extra clothes that did not fit in her small closet. I was 99% sure it was him, and 5 seconds later the closet door slides open and he climbs out, only to get an extremely loud boo from me. My mum, who was currently talking on the phone, did not appreciate the loud noise and told us that we could only act like that outside. The kid then walked to my room, shut the door and locked it. My door had one of those click locks that had a little hole on the other side so that you could easily put a piece of wire into it if you happened to lock yourself out. So I went to look for something in the kitchen that I could use to open the door. At this point, what he was doing was getting kind of annoying. My mum got mad at me for rummaging around in the kitchen at that moment, when the kid walked out of my room and over to the kitchen. He was supposed to be leaving, and instead he was stalling in a really creepy way. When I looked over, he was in the kitchen holding our biggest steak knife and was handling it as if he was imagining what it would be like if he ran it through someone. I couldn't take this, so I went to my mum's room and told her the kid was holding a knife. She told the person on the phone line that she had to go and asked the kid what on earth he was thinking. He denied ever touching the knife, although I could prove him wrong with the fingerprints, and my mum told him that he really needed to go. I walked him to the elevator, and when it came in, he got in and said, "I took something." So I held the elevator, and before I asked what he took, he told me he didn't take anything. He repeated this shenanigan a few more times before my mum started yelling at me about holding the elevator, so I laughed this off and finally let him go. When the elevator beeped indicating it was on the floor below me, he called up the shaft, "I took your tripod." For background, my tripod was a stand that would plug into the charger hole in my iPhone. I used it to prop up my phone when I recorded videos and time-lapses. He had first seen my tripod the day before, when I let him use it to make a YouTube video of him playing my keyboard. He was fascinated by it. Anyway, I went back into our apartment, looked all over for it, and came to the conclusion that he had in fact taken it. That was when I got a FaceTime call from him. He was outside my building on the street, and he smiled and held up the tripod. I was pissed, but remained calm and handed the FaceTime to my mum, who told him in a very firm way to bring it back immediately. A minute later, we realized we should have told him to leave it with the front desk of the building, as we didn't want him coming anywhere near us again. Unfortunately, when I called him, he was already in the elevator, so I advised him to leave it right outside the elevator door. I was not concerned about this, since we only have 2 sets of neighbors who dominate all the other apartments on our floor and are almost never in the country. I stayed on the FaceTime call with him until he got to my floor, and I watched him put the tripod down on the floor in front of the elevator, and I never saw him go back since he covered the camera with his finger. For the next few minutes, we heard this kid walking around outside our front door. He must have been there quite a while, because after 15 minutes I FaceTimed him again, and he was just walking out of the lobby. Please note there were quite a few buzzes before he answered, so he'd probably been sitting in the lobby when he got tired of being outside our house. We quickly called the front desk and said the kid was not welcome back in. I don't know if the kid was just bored or what. I had learnt the day before that he was obsessed with Pennywise the clown. I don't know very much about him, so I don't know if the kid was pretending to be him. I wonder why he felt the need to steal a $5 tripod that I would have most likely given to him had he asked for it. I don't know why he was in my mother's closet. It also confuses me why he handled and inspected one of our kitchen knives. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd have not notified my mum that one of our knives had been in his possession, or if I'd not told him to leave the tripod outside the elevator instead of coming to the front door. I may be seriously overreacting, but it was quite disturbing to me. I'm still playing hockey on that team, and I'm going to go see the kid again tomorrow. It may have all been laughs for him, but did I mention that he continuously begged to stay for sleepovers even though I barely knew him? After this, it's a definite no-no, and I don't think I will ever invite him to my house again. To build context, I'm an Irish female, and this happened back in 2007, when I was in my mid-20s. Back then I loved going to the clubs to dance the night away. One particular night I went out with some friends, which included my cousin Frank. We went to a nightclub, had some drinks, and danced to the Daft Punk One More Time, as well as other popular music of the time. I wasn't living in this town at the time, so I arranged to stay at Frank's house. We had a fridge stocked with beer for when we got back and planned on getting wasted. We probably left the club at 1 a.m. and got a taxi to his house. Back at Frank's house, we spent a good few hours listening to Led Zeppelin, Nirvana, with a bit of Metallica thrown in for good measure. My cousin was in a rock band and loved the classics. At around 3 a.m., Frank's bandmate Jack called and asked if he could come over to stay. He had been clubbing at a different location and needed somewhere to crash. Frank lived alone in a 3-bedroom house, and being a single guy, he hosted a few wild parties over the years. Frank told him no problem and that he could come over, but explained that we were having a quiet night. In other words, not to bring anyone else. Jack came over and seemed super friendly. Being the drummer of the band, he looked exactly like what I expected. Long hair, Zeppelin t-shirt and ripped jeans. His behavior changed not long after arriving. He was super animated and was just on a different buzz. He definitely seemed drugged up on something, and hey, so long as he enjoys himself, who am I to judge? At one stage, he started playing air drums and continued with it for ages. During one of his air drum solos, I asked him to play something and he didn't answer, and I kind of nudged him very lightly, but just to get his attention. That's when he went crazy and shouted at me to never interrupt him when he was playing drums. That pissed me off. I didn't like the aggression. Frank said, "Relax, man, there's no need to shout." Jack replied that no one should interrupt him when he was in the zone. Frank and I rolled our eyes and carried on chatting, drinking, and ignoring him. The atmosphere after that had changed, and the shift prompted me to go to bed. I don't know how long later, but I was awoken from a deep sleep when I heard this breathing sound in my room. I'm still in a drunken slumber, and it took me a few minutes to register that the noise sounded like someone inhaling. Someone was in my bed, with a bunch of my hair in his hands just sniffing it. I froze. What the hell are you doing? Relax, I'm just smelling your hair, said Jack. Not gonna do anything. Well, adrenaline coursed through me, but I was stuck to the bed with fear, and the room was pitch black. I shouted for Frank at the top of my lungs, and in a speedy time he ran to the room, turned on the light, only to find Jack in my bed, holding a handful of my hair. It's not what it looks like, bud, he said. I was only smelling it. I was sleeping facing the door, so I could see Frank, and I dared not look behind me to see Jack. But his voice sounded like that of a child who knows he's done something wrong and is about to get into trouble. Frank lost it, told him to get the hell downstairs. My cousin apologized a lot, but said he did not want to kick him out of the house in the drugged-up state he was in. The door had no lock, so my cousin slept in a chair in front of the bedroom door. Jack actually tried to come in again. I woke up to Frank telling him to get the hell back downstairs or we would kick him out the house. The next day he was gone by the time I got up. But a few days later, when Frank tracked Jack down, he was told he'd been mixing drugs with alcohol and was embarrassed by his behavior. Even though it's been years since it happened, it still gives me the creeps to think about. Big, deep, slow inhales, and it gives me goosebumps. The band broke up not long after that, so I never had to meet him again. I was told he was a good guy, so maybe the drugs made him super strange. I'm just glad Frank was there, or who knows what he would have done to me. This happened to me almost 2 years ago, in early June of 2020. I was just going over to my friend's house, Anna and Lonnie. They were sisters that lived together, and it was only a 2-minute drive away, so I was always welcome. When I walked inside of their house, I noticed their mum's boyfriend, John, and a man I didn't recognize standing in her kitchen. She told me it was John's foster brother, Matt. I was introduced and went over to the kitchen chairs to talk about whatever we did at the time. He was marginally attractive, but nothing more than that. I would notice that Matt would occasionally look at me while my friends and I were talking. I didn't think much of that, so I brushed it off, and we later moved to another room to hang out for a few hours until I went home. Fast forward a few months. I was going to ask my 2 friends if they wanted to hang out, but my friend Anna told me that she was going to Texas with John and Matt to help move a neighbor's belongings, and wouldn't be back for a week. So I decided I would still hang out with Lonnie until Anna came back from Texas. When she came back, this is where everything started getting weird. One morning, I noticed I got a message sent from an email address rather than a phone number. Out of curiosity, I decided to open the message and read it. It was John's brother Matt, and him telling me that he got my number from Anna and was hoping it was okay. I personally was a bit confused as to why Anna gave him my number and figured I'd ask her about it later, since I was planning to hang out with her as she was back. A few hours after being back at their house, I asked her why she had given Matt my number. This is when I noticed she looked a bit nervous. I told her I wasn't angry with her, and that I just wanted to know why. She said that she needed to tell me something, and I was confused. Apparently, the entire time to and from Texas, Matt would ask lots of questions about me whenever John would get out of the car to get gas, then immediately stop the moment he returned. When he had asked me if he could get my number and if I had a boyfriend, she told him that I did have a boyfriend and did not try anything, but that she probably wouldn't mind regarding the number. So, she gave it over, albeit somewhat reluctantly. I felt extremely weirded out. Mind you, this man is in his 30s while I'm only 18. I met my current boyfriend in July of 2020 and started dating him in August. This is just for clarification's sake. I didn't want to ruin the mood, so we just dropped it and went on with our day. For the next 3 months, Matt would text at the most random times ever. At first I didn't mind, but over time it would be consistent messages, and when I wouldn't respond within minutes, he would text me every 4 to 5 minutes, and if I still wouldn't have responded, well, it wouldn't go well. Basically, it would be him texting me 99% of the time. He would tell me how much he liked my style, and that he was too nervous to ask for my number when we first met. He would constantly ask me to FaceTime him, or meet up with him because he was a really chill guy and wanted to get to know me. Of course, I would respectfully decline. I didn't feel comfortable meeting up or speaking with this guy on the phone that I'd only met once. I didn't mention that my boyfriend wouldn't like it, since Anna had already told him that I had a boyfriend, so I thought he would have taken the hint. One time he asked if I was available to talk, so I said sure. What's up? I noticed that my message was sent but not delivered, so I figured it was a problem on his end. Next day, he later sent me a message of his response getting offended saying, "Your silence is confirmation of what I've been hearing was true." It's cool. I got the answer I needed. I didn't even see his message come in. 5 days went by, and he sent another message saying, "Your response barely came in this morning. Must not have been delivered from your end," which was strange, as I knew it had been. I was in my house, which had a decent Wi-Fi. I didn't feel like communicating with him, so I just never responded and left it alone. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. I was out with my boyfriend and just spending quality time at the mall, having fun, when I heard a text notification ring on my phone, and I noticed that I got a message from Matt. The message contained a GIF with hearts saying Happy Valentine's Day. Now by this time, my boyfriend knew the whole story, so I thought it would be funny of my boyfriend to send a picture of himself saying, "Happy Valentine's Day" back. And he did. Matt responded, saying he had actually sent that to every woman in his contact book. And if I had a problem with it, I could have just ignored the message, and that he couldn't wait to tell his army buddies about this, and that he should post the picture of my boyfriend online. Now we both know he was extremely defensive, and overall acting childish. So my boyfriend texted Matt on how weird it was for a 30-year-old man to be texting an 18-year-old, and he repeatedly asked to stop contacting me. Then Matt would just make military jokes to my boyfriend about how he's in the Marines and Matt was in the army, comparing the two, irrelevant stuff. So me noticing the conversation getting nowhere and I getting fed up, I grabbed my phone back and just told Matt sternly to never contact me again. By that point, he was just making rumors on how to talk to another dude in the military, and it never worked out. Just making an arse out of himself, really. I didn't care if he was upset. I have a boyfriend, and he was the one who got upset in the first place. I just switched off my phone. I wanted to have a good time. So, the day after Valentine's Day, I received 2 extremely long messages from Matt on how he was disappointed with me. I never mentioned that I had a boyfriend to him, which in either case wasn't his business. How he never would have reached out to me if he knew I wasn't of age. Or, the most disturbing thing of all, how he would have shown up at my house confronting me about this and how embarrassing it would be for me. I have to say I never told him where I lived, nor did my friends, because I told them not to mention anything about me to him because I began feeling uncomfortable around him. And if somehow he did find my address, I would have had my dad open the door and speak to him himself. My dad was a sheriff, ex-army veteran who served in Vietnam. He's really strong for his age too. If this guy tried anything, I don't think he'd have had a chance. I never responded after this and told my friends and parents everything that happened, and they told Matt he couldn't move into their house since he planned on moving in with them for a few months. I never heard anything else about him, nor received a message from him, and I hope I never do. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm glad to be back. My mouth feels a lot better now. I don't know how well the dental surgery went. I think it went well. For those of you interested in teeth, apparently if everything went well, I won't have to get my wisdom tooth removed. But if it did, if it didn't go well, I suppose I will have to get it removed. But yeah, it's not like dead or anything, the tooth. It's just like the gum was on top of it and part of it had to be removed so the bacteria buildup wouldn't be so bad. Anyway, not sure if there are any dentists listening now, but that's what it is. Yeah, tonight we had some pretty chilled creeper stories. Obviously nothing horrifying, other than, the kidnap and near murder or possible murder. That was... Being in a situation like that is pretty horrifying. I've never been in anything like that, but can you imagine just being taken and held hostage for 3 days, not knowing if you're going to live or die? I mean, that's pretty horrific. But you certainly get some creepy people out there. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. Don't forget that you can listen to more by clicking the link at the end of the video, and I would like to give a huge thanks, as always, to my members and patrons whose names can't be seen on screen. Thank you all. You guys are amazing. I think it's best to leave things here for now. Hopefully, see you in another video, which you can click on now on screen if you like. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.